Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you. Hope you had a safe and pleasant drive in from all your locations at home. This is a time of year. We're 3 weeks away from the wonderful Pentecost Holy Day and the messages that we'll have brought to us. And one of those messages is that we are to live as first fruits, as if we were already in God's kingdom. Even though that kingdom has not arrived yet on this earth, we're to live our lives as if we were part of that kingdom with God's Holy Spirit dwelling in us. Every year we're reminded how much closer we're inching towards Christ's return as well, and how we are to be continually filled and filling our reserves of spiritual oil to keep our lamps lit, so that when the bridegroom comes, Jesus Christ, we won't be found as the 5 foolish virgins in the parable of the 10 virgins. In Matthew 25, verses 1 through 13, it's in the middle of several parables that Jesus Christ gave, and he has a theme going through a number of them. This particular parable on the 5 wise virgins and the 5 foolish ones, in this case, each took a jar of oil. Well, 5 of them did, and 5 of them didn't. And the 5 foolish virgins or maidens or bridesmaids, it depends on the translation you're looking at, 5 of them took their lamps. All 10 had lamps filled with oil. 5 of them took extra oil. Please join me in this parable in Matthew 25 and verse 1. Let's take a look at it together. Matthew 25 and verse 1, and as you're turning there, there's a wide range of opinions on the wedding traditions in Judea 2,000 years ago in Jesus Christ's day. But the New International Bible Commentary describes a traditional Jewish wedding in those days as a nighttime event, a nighttime banquet or a wedding feast would take place. The bridegroom and his family and friends would start a procession when the time was right, when they were ready, a procession from the bridegroom's house across whatever town or village they were in to the home of the bride-to-be. In a typical village, many guests, neighbors, friends would join in this procession. And so there'd be an entourage of people, finally, by the time they came knocking on the door of the bride-to-be. And then they would head back with that young, anticipating, excited young female to go back to the bridegroom's house where there would be a big banquet or a festive dinner. The lesson begs the question, as we delve into it, are we keeping our spiritual jars of reserve oil filled so that we're ready to anticipate a delay in Jesus Christ's return, should it happen that way, at least in our minds, The title today is, Are We Filling Our Jars? That's all. Are we filling our jars? Well, let's read now that we're in Matthew 25 and verse 1. Then the kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Verse 2 through 4, now 5 of them were wise, 5 were foolish. Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them, meaning no extra oil in jars. But the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. Verse 5, but while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. So there was a delay in this parable of the preparedness of the bridegroom, the man to be married. Now, these lamps, just a little illustration here, could have been small clay lamps. They called them Herodian lamps after King Herod, which were very common, little tiny lamps that were mostly indoor lamps. But some scholars feel that these were torches, where you had something wrapped at the tip where you could dip it in oil or pour oil on it, and you might get about a 15-minute span of flame before they needed to be replenished. That might have been more typical on an outdoor walk across the village to the door of the bridesmaid. The bride-to-be. And so verses 6 and 7, we're still in Matthew 25, at the midnight cry, "Behold, the bridegroom is coming. Go out to meet him." Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. Again, they could be maidens, bridesmaids, virgins, different translations. Now, trimming their lamps was cutting off the charred end of the tip of the torch, if it was a torch, and applying more oil to it, again, so it would burn another 15 minutes or so, typically. Verses 8 through 10, "The foolish ones said to the wise, 'Give us some of your oil, our lamps are going out.' But the wise answered, saying, 'No, lest there not be enough for us and you, but go rather to those who sell the oil and buy some more for yourselves.' They were saying, 'We don't have enough to give you out of our spare vessels of oil. You've got to go out and find some more.' Verse 10, when they went out to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him into the wedding, and the door was shut." So here we see in the parable, 5 wise young women went on the procession to the groom's house, and then the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. It was too late for the other 5. Time of preparation had passed. The coming of the bridegroom had now occurred. Verses 11 through 13, still in Matthew 25, 11 through 13, it concludes the parable. And the crux of the message for us is here. "Afterward, the other virgins came also, saying, 'Lord, Lord, open to us, open the door.' But he answered and said, 'Assuredly, I say to you, I do not know you.'" Verse 13, "Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming." There's the lesson. Watch therefore. It's easy to focus on the detail, the little detail that they all fell asleep. Many times we've heard this parable, we scratch our head and says, well, look, they were all asleep at some point. But that's not the main point. That they fell asleep while waiting a long time wasn't what determined which ones were wise and which ones were foolish. If anything, the parable emphasizes the length of the delay, how long it took for the bridegroom to present himself, to start on the entourage to her house. The bridegroom took longer than they expected, so much longer that the virgins, wise and foolish alike, got tired. They continued, they got to a point where they rested, let's say. They rested. Yes, they fell asleep in the parable. Well, let's skip back to verses 42 through 44 of the previous chapter. So we're in Matthew 24, verse 42 now. Matthew 24, verse 42. Here it connects to the same lesson of the 10 virgins. "Watch, therefore." The NIV says, "Keep watching. For you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour which you do not expect." So you see the connection here. It's on the same theme of watchfulness and of staying prepared for the coming of the bridegroom, even if it appears to be delayed. Once again, all the 10 virgins or maidens had oil in their lamps or on their torches, either way. But it was the long duration that caught 5 of them off their guard without enough oil to sustain them. The wise virgins, well, you could see that they were prepared for as long as it took for the arrival of the bridegroom. And the others were just not prepared. Here's a little anecdote which I read long ago, and I've altered it somewhat. I don't know who the author was. I'll take some liberty with this little illustration. Satan was studying the condition of God's true church, trying to think of another master deception to pull God's faithful people off their guard. One demon had an idea and came and presented it to Satan. Satan said to him, "What's your idea?" The demon says, "Why don't you try to convince those who trust in God that there is no God?" And Satan says, no, the elect know that there is one true God. That's not going to work. The demon, why don't you maybe try to convince them that there is no devil? No, the elect know that I'm the God of this world. The demon, then perhaps you could persuade them that there's plenty of time still. There's no rush. There's no hurry for them to wake up from their spiritual slumber, that all things are going to just continue the way they always have been. That caught Satan's attention. Could Satan influence even the elect of God that there will be plenty of time before Christ's return? After all, it's been, 2,000 years now? Longer than 2,000 years. Oh, there's no rush. There's no hurry to get our spiritual houses in order, both in our own personal lives and collectively in the Church of God. Could Satan still do that, as we know that Satan is still trying to make inroads into God's church, and God will allow a certain amount for the sifting and purifying of his people? We've been sifted and purified in the last couple of decades in God's true church, and we know that there will be more times of testing ahead. Satan would love to convince us that time is not short. He knows that complacency is the unseen enemy of vigilance, being always on our watchfulness. That's what vigilance is. Now, think about in times of relative calm, we're still being tested and examined, and we could be tested spiritually. Things like Sabbath observance, instructing our children, keeping up a strong prayer routine in our lives. What about matters of the heart, which we know in this end time period that Satan will find inroads to attack people in matters of the heart? Are we being watchful and not being easily offended by words and actions of others? In one particular issue I won't go into, but are we being cautious about engaging in debates over private church matters on social media? I was watching a dialogue take place this week, which I know that a great many people in God's church, I say a great many, over 160 different comments were made on a particular point that was just sad to see that this became such a public discourse when it was a private matter. That's all I have to say on that. Going back to the parable, the oil, picture something that can't be transferred. I can't share with you this spiritual oil. You can't share yours with me. This is a very individual thing, and it was the dividing line in the parable between the 5 wise and the 5 foolish virgins. So how can we be sure that we're among the wise and not among the foolish? Please turn to Proverbs 2, verses 3 through 9 with me. Proverbs 2, verses 3 through 9. While you're turning, our oil reserves, a measure of how spiritually ready and prepared we are for the return of Jesus Christ whenever it takes place. Again, this is not something that we have a resource that we can share with one another. We each individually need to work on preparedness. It's an intensely personal, individual resource, and all we can do is build up our own personal reserves. Let's read together Proverbs 2, verses 3 through 9. Yes, if you cry out for discernment and lift up your voice for understanding, if you seek her as silver, wisdom, if you search for her wisdom as hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk uprightly. He guards the paths of justice. He preserves the way of his saints. And then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity and every good path. This is filling our jars with oil. Following this path, seeking out what is God's knowledge, the knowledge of God and his discernment and his understanding. And while it's true we can't share our oil with one another, we can encourage one another in those pursuits. I won't turn, but Hebrews 10, verse 24. Hebrews 10, verse 24 and 25 simply says this, "And let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works, exhorting one another," meaning encouraging one another, "and so much the more as you see the day approaching, the day of Christ's return." This too is filling our jars with oil. So in conclusion, we could be asking ourselves some very important questions. Am I studying God's Word regularly, searching for that knowledge of God? Am I storing up God's wisdom and His understanding to be prepared for any spiritual emergency? And spiritual emergencies do come rather suddenly at times. And we live in this electronic technological age where communication is instantaneous and can reach a global audience in terms of what we're seeing in the network of information flow and social media. And artificial intelligence, again, is going to play an interesting role in the years to come in terms of information, true and false, that spreads across the world in thousands of different, or 1,000 or more different languages instantaneously. We have to be on our guard. So finally, the last question is, am I constantly filling my jar of oil for those emergencies and in preparation for Christ's eventual but certain return?